Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 103. Today's guest, Brooke Morales, is a creative designer whose work involves using her many skills, including web design, illustration, videography, and photography, to tell her clients' stories and help people connect with their audience. Brooke loves her work, so much so that sometimes she's leaned too far to one side of the scale when it comes to work-life balance. In our conversation, we talk about how a combination of art, nature journaling, and mindfulness has helped Brooke find more balance, be present, and show up for the people who matter most in her life. Let's listen. Brooke, thank you so much for being here with me today on the podcast.
Thank you, Bethan. I appreciate the opportunity.
I always start at the beginning, and I'd love to hear about your childhood nature experiences. I wonder if you had nature with you from the beginning or if it's something you came to later in life.
I did have nature from the beginning, and then I lost it for a while. And it took a while for me to get back to it. So it began with me being, I would say, a big tomboy as a little girl. And I grew up in a family, we had a lot of boys in our family, and I grew up in a neighborhood where we had a lot of boys. So if you wanted to play outside and you wanted to do those things, you did the boy things. You built forts and you played bows and arrows and you rode your bike and you played football. And I really liked rooting around in the trees. We didn't have trees that were tall enough to actually climb because we were in a newer neighborhood. But I liked rooting around, kind of like around eucalyptus trees and around where we had little willow trees, and we had some peach trees. And I would see what I could do with the materials that were kind of coming from the trees, trying to fashion them into little things like little crafts. And I wound up, the reason, I mentioned I had a separation with nature was I had asthma as a young kid. And we had thought when I was little that possibly the trees, like the eucalyptus trees, were causing some type of an allergy that was causing a flare-up. So I would go out and play, but I began to develop a hesitancy for playing around in certain types of trees and playing around in the dirt because I began to look at it like a threat, because that might mean I don't get to breathe that night and I don't get to sleep that night. So I began to become a little overly, I would say, clean. And it slowly started pulling me away from getting into the trees and into the dirt because of that. I would still play outside a lot, though. And I found that if I went and skated, because I loved rollerblading and skating before there were rollerblades, if I went outside and I skated, I could experience the wind in my hair. And especially if it had rained, I could experience the smell, the rich smell of the ozone. And it was a way for me to get outside and feel that without doing something that aggravated my asthma as much, that didn't get me in the trees, but still got me outside. So that was kind of the genesis for how I started off and then evolved that. And, it changed as I got older and as life changed too.
That's amazing. I love that you had this recognition that this is important, like being outside, feeling the wind, having this engaged experience with the world is important, and that you adapted in that way. And then how did you come back? How did that returning to nature happen for you?
For me, it happened with photography. So I had built up this kind of like bubble around myself, thinking I was protecting myself. And in that time, I was still very active outdoors. I As I mentioned, I would rollerblade. I became a cyclist, and then I got into jogging. I overcame most of my asthma, which is great.
Mm.
But in that time, when I was overcoming it, I kind of forgot you can go outside and play besides doing something that's, speed exertion related. And I took photography up, and I noticed that when I was taking photos, everything fell away from me in terms of worrying about, dust or worrying about these different things, because I would get so lost in composing a shot and looking at the colors and waiting on the timing of a sunset, for example, that it was the same type of immersion I find in nature journaling, or at least very similar.
Mhm.
And that's when I began to seek out opportunities to just go as many places in my local area as possible and be out in nature and observe nature and be able to document what I saw. And it was through that I would realize, oh, I'm kneeling in the mud to get this shot,
Mhm.
completely covered in dust because I've been waiting on this one, you know, like in this one pasture where they were it was I think a vineyard, not too far from where I worked at the time, and so you have tractors, that are kicking up lots of dirt, and I realized I didn't care, and that was a big deal for me as someone who had become kind of a clean freak, to not care that I was getting all dirty and that I was outside, and it's like that fear fell away, and then that evolved eventually to nature journaling.
And the that experience of being in the dirt and the dust wasn't affecting you in a physical way?
Not the same way. So it was
Mm.
a little bit of runoff. It
Mm.
wasn't like giant billows of dirt, which I think would affect anybody.
Sure, sure.
But I mean, yeah, I had gotten to a point where being in something like that with just a little bit of dust
Mm.
worried me
Yes,
psychologically,
yes, I
because I had
understand.
paired that with, a negative outcome.
Mhm, mhm.
So it began to reintroduce me into the environment and getting back outside.
Mm. Tell me about the nature around you. So when you go outside, you have your camera or your nature journal. What sorts of environments and landscapes make your heart sing?
We have this really stunning view of this kind of foothill mountain off in the distance called Mount Diablo. And the sky and the way that it hits, and the sun is occluded by Mount Diablo in the evenings. And you can see the sunset and the hues. And it's always, of course, when you have a little bit of clouds, that it's even that much more delightful, because it just does something to the colors and the richness of that gradient. And my husband and I, we take a walk almost religiously every day.
Mm.
And so we walk, and a lot of those walks are in the evening, and we get to experience looking at the sunset. That makes my heart sing. Another one is I'm not used to being near water as much. I mean, besides I was a swimmer, but not like a natural or semi quasi natural body of water. This one is a man made lake that I'm referring to, but we have a man made lake very close to where we live, and we it attracts egrets, it attracts blue heron, it attracts killdeer, and I've learned their calls. Not the blue heron, I haven't really heard it call much, but the killdeer. And just watching, like recently we had a family of swallows, barn swallows, build a nest just outside of our front door. And they would fly to the lake to retrieve mud in that general area for their nest. And so watching this ecosystem of how this lake feeds the birds and how it just attracts this wildlife is really fascinating. And so I get excited every time I see a bird. And so for me, it's just like I have this everyday opportunity to really watch that and to get to know these creatures kind of like as characters of my life.
I love that so much. How wonderful to have that so near that you can watch the stories unfold and get to know them, even maybe get to know individuals and watch the whole thing play out. That's
It's been
beautiful.
delightful. It's a new experience. I grew up in the city mainly, so this is a nice change. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk about your creative and professional story. You're a creative designer and you learned to make websites long before I even knew there was such a thing as the internet. You you learn design, photography, videography. You have this a huge number of um, a huge number of skills, and all of these you reflect that they're part of your ability to tell stories, or your desire to tell stories. Tell me a little about how your creative career has unfolded.
Yeah. So I began when I was 15 building websites, and I didn't really know much about websites at that time. I had just gotten my first computer. It was a family computer at that time. They weren't nearly as ubiquitous as they are now. And the internet at that time was really, there wasn't much. It's
Yeah.
1995. So I wanted to learn how to build a website. And at that time, I didn't know that I wanted to do that to tell stories. I didn't have a story in particular I wanted to tell at that time. But I liked the idea of putting something together and learning a system. And I did that. And I began creating more and more websites and had actually received my first official project that I was commissioned for, to tell somebody else's story.
Mm.
And it was a story that I believed in. It was for a product that helps protect folks that have an IV in their arm, and it was a device that had not yet been patented, that this
Mhm.
gentleman was trying to patent, that would help patients not get other diseases or infections while they were in the hospital treating something completely unrelated. And I really believed in what we were doing, and I felt good that I could use this skill of web design to help try to share messaging so that this person could hopefully get this product on the market and help patients. So that was the first exposure, but I didn't even at that time look at it as I'm telling stories.
Mhm.
I think I was 18 or so around that time.
Yes.
And over time, I began working more and more as a designer. I was always a designer in the background, even if I had to take other kinds of, jobs just for steady employment. But it was a skill that I didn't want to let go of. And I would say I began really finding myself and my role in that when I began working for a senior living community. And it was a community that had really, I mean, I had been doing so much design work, print media, web design. Social media hadn't really been as much of a thing yet.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I wanted to help this organization because this was a nonprofit senior living community. It was a standalone organization. It was very different and very nice and neat. And it was there to help folks really just enjoy the remainder of their life. And there was something about knowing that telling that story and helping people find something that generally, if you don't know what senior living is or what it can be, you can imagine it as maybe something very bad. And my goal was, how do I help people engage with something that could be an excellent fit for them? And maybe it won't be, but to show them what it is properly and build that connection so that they could be introduced to something that would allow them to have community where they didn't have community before. We're talking about people that, a lot of the time, they couldn't get around as easily, but they're not done living.
Mhm.
And they have an opportunity in their own homes now to really connect with others or to really be a part of something. And I found that the more I could learn about sharing stories online, the more I could learn about sharing about this community and, leveraging social media for that end and leveraging, um, any kind of web platform, print media, video media to convey that message really opened up the opportunity for me to help others.
I feel like to do your job well, you have to go into the story of someone else or walk for a moment in their shoes to understand what
Mhm.
what they need you to bring forward, what's important, what's going to show them to others in a way that others can receive and understand their message. Is that true? They have to sort of put yourself in their shoes to tell their story in a good way.
Very much so. Yes. I think a lot of us, we want to be understood, and I think especially with seniors, they remember themselves and they see themselves still as being a much younger version of
Yes.
themselves,
Yes.
their identity. And when they meet someone new, that person who's new to them, their only impression of that individual is the 90-year-old or the
Yeah.
85-year-old. And it's not this, all of those years and that richness that led up to that point. And so, one of the things that mattered to me the most when I was working with folks is trying to understand and not just skip to 85.
Mm, mm.
It was to try to understand, who is this person altogether, the complete snapshot of this individual. And in order to do that, you have to listen a lot, and you have to help people feel comfortable enough to tell their story. And through that, you do that enough times and you spend enough time, you start to understand also, you know, what were the 30s like? What were the
Yeah.
40s? What were the 50s like? And you start to understand kind of that whole demographic in a different way. Just like, I would look at the 80s, because that was a critical time in my life,
Yeah.
You try to understand what their version of life has been. And then respect that and pay tribute to that in a way that doesn't put them into just like a stereotype like I think so
Mm-mm.
many people can do, where you just have like it's almost like you disregard all of that history up until that point, and then they're just a one quick snapshot idea. So I used to try to tell the more complete story through being able to share the experience of what it was like to actually be within this environment and engage that way.
That's really beautiful and important. And I think that that could be taken into our relationships with all people, all all the time, not just in a work situation like you, learning and listening and telling someone else's story, but the way we engage with everyone around us, because everyone has their backstory, everyone has the things that have made up who they are. And when we can sit and listen and learn from each other, I think that's a really powerful thing. And people who have a longer life history have such a richness. And I do remember that when I was young, looking at my grandparents and thinking that they had always been 70. And when you take time to listen to stories about when your grandmother was dancing or courting or whatever it was, it's a really interesting, powerful, connective experience.
Mhm.
I love
It's a
that.
beautiful experience to share with someone.
Tell me the story of how you came to nature journaling.
So I was starting to realize that I was working way too much. I loved what I did, and I think and what I still do, but what I do has changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I loved what I did, and I invested so much of my time into it because it was just a joy to make. It was a joy to create. It was a joy to learn different platforms and, kind of get into the weeds on a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different things. And so I think, you know, people who really love what they do, it's a blessing and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if I had to choose, do I love what I do or do I hate what I do? I want to love it.
Yes.
Problem is when you haven't yet suffered from any kind of burnout, you don't know that it's important to stop.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you'll be warned along the way of don't work so hard, all the time like this. You're going to burn yourself out. And I think when you don't know what burnout is, you're like, ah, what's burnout?
Yeah.
I'm fine. I love this. This is
Yeah.
fun. I was doing, I would say, uh, solid 70-hour weeks on a
Wow.
regular basis for a long time. And in that time, I accumulated a lot of knowledge about what I was doing, and I really did have a good time. But I didn't know how to set healthy boundaries with myself. And the problem with that is it kept me in front of a computer virtually all day long because what I do is highly digital. And so I was at a computer. I would work out still. Exercise has always been really important to me. I would make time for exercise. But other than that, I was at a computer whenever I could be learning new things. And I began to realize that I was getting really tired
Mm.
and I was feeling a new kind of resistance forming in my mind of wanting to do the work, but having trouble coming up with new ideas to tell the story, especially when I had been telling the same kind of story different ways for a little while. And I faced burnout and I started realizing this must be what burnout feels like.
Mhm.
And I started looking into, well, what is burnout? And I was, you know, trying to understand what I was feeling and, how do you get out of it? How do you fix it? You know, um, and I started to realize that I needed to change how I approached life and how I approached work, and that I needed to take time away to not look at pixels and to rest. And it was really hard on the onset to rest. I'm not good at it. I still am not. I have to, it's one of the hardest things in my life is to actually make time to rest. So for me, I'm very fidgety with my fingers. I want to be doing something. And I decided, well, you know, I've read that adult coloring books are fun and
Yes.
they're relaxing. And so I got some color pencils and some markers and an adult coloring book and I tried that and it was okay. I liked the experience to a point, but I felt like, I don't know if I don't know if I wanna color this thing that somebody else has put together. I kinda wish I had made the thing I'm
Mhm.
coloring. And right around that time as well, the pandemic hit, and everything was shut off. And I saw on Facebook, a friend of mine, she had shared that John Muir Laws, who I didn't know who John Muir Laws was at that time, that he was making his, nature journaling resource manual for teachers available for free. And so I thought, well, what is that? What is nature journaling? I'm doing journaling, regular journaling, and I like art, but what is nature journaling? And so I downloaded the resource and was looking at that. And I thought, I need to buy this person's book. He has a book, another book. We have, of course, more than one. And I got the Law's Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling. And I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. When I sit down to relax, I'm not going to do the adult coloring book. I want to do these exercises. It engaged me, and I saw where, like one of the first exercises was, just like I think it was to get outside and to draw something. And it had been a rainy day, and as I mentioned, the pandemic had really just started, with full lockdowns. And so I went to a local park and I drew a leaf under a tree on some graph paper because that's the
Mhm.
only kind of paper I had with me at the time because I hadn't purchased any real art supplies yet. I drew that tree and I mean that leaf, it was like a maple leaf. And I remember trying to guess at the dimensions and making notes about it, just trying to kind of do it per what the instructions were. And I got lost, and it was relaxing, and it was this horrible pandemic moment that separated everything I loved. But I had this peace in that moment, and it just felt like something that deserved more quality time. So that's how I got into it, and I've loved the experience since. It's become a very important part of my daily life.
That's a beautiful story. And you had this experience of burnout, and also I'm just reflecting on it right now that maybe the opposite of burnout is flow, or the opposite is, I know burnout is its own thing and it's got a sort of volume and a duration, but or maybe the antidote, maybe I'm trying to say the antidote to burnout, because being in that moment, being in that flow that you described, sitting under the tree with a leaf, getting lost in this moment, is such a healing thing, isn't it? It's such a healing way to spend our time, especially when we've experienced a long period of exhaustion or ill health or burnout.
Very much so. And I would catch myself when you're nature journaling, and I bet this happens with everybody who gets lost in nature journaling. You'll be drawing and you'll catch yourself go, that breath.
Yeah.
That's when you realize, oh, I was lost. Oh, I got lost. Oh, that was nice.
Yeah, that gives me goosebumps. That's a really powerful thing. And just to let go, because it sounds like you were carrying a lot of you were working so much. You're obviously very highly driven and want to achieve things. And that can be its own weight, can't it? And when you put down that weight, it can feel good.
It can feel really good. It was, I don't want to interrupt a question.
No, there was no question. I'm just listening to you.
No, so it's helped me cope with other things
Yeah.
since then, which
Mm-mm.
are related to that kind of stress. When you talked about, you said I'm driven, and I thought, and I talked about that exhale, that moment.
Mm.
It I didn't realize it until a couple of years ago that I carry so much of my stress in my body,
Mm.
in my back and my shoulders. And that manifested itself into some health problems for a while that I'm still overcoming. I've gotten a lot better with. But just the importance now of seeing it as, this isn't just something I do as a hobby.
Mm.
This isn't just something I'm going to do because I want to relax. If I don't do this, I could get very sick. Or if I
Yes.
don't do the equivalent of calming down, and this is the thing that helps me calm down the most. This is the thing that helps me cope with anxiety. This is the thing that is my ticket to letting that carried up in the upper body, and the chest stress. It's a conduit to letting it out.
Mm-mm. I think being able to physically identify where things are sitting or weighing on us, and also physically identify what does it feel like when I am letting that stuff drop away. That's a really powerful experience in itself. So you said the back, the upper back, the chest. Sometimes I hold a lot of my stuff in the belly, and
Oh,
I have had like health issues related to digestion and the belly, and it's a powerful thing just to identify, oh yeah, this is where it is. And if we're thinking in terms of like mindfulness and being present with what is without judging it, so I learned to say, oh yeah, here it is, hi, like without saying, oh, this is what I'm carrying, and relate to that in a negative way, just like, oh, hi, you're here again. And without judgment, noticing. And that helps us put it down. I don't know if you've experienced that too, when you it's almost like noticing is the first step to putting it down or moving through it. Do you find that?
Very much. Yes. So with the pain issues I had been experiencing, I still experience, but at first what happened was my husband and I, we had gone through a big move, and I had left my kind of a larger career job so I could relocate and be closer to him. We were about to get ready. We were about to get married at that time. So we were engaged at that time. And the pandemic had been around for about a year. My role at that community I was talking about was pretty involved. And, it's a senior community that's highly impacted by a pandemic.
Of course.
A lot more caution, being there. And we're going through this move and we're taking care of everything. And we move in, and a lot of my life had changed. And suddenly my arms started killing me. And it felt like I couldn't use them anymore. And I thought I had just picked up a really heavy box or maybe pulled something or something, right? Because I had never had any problems at all. And this arm issue led me into physical therapy, and it spread to my back. And then I found out like it's potentially stress related. So in that process of having issues at first with arms and the back and the spreading, it made me realize that your brain is a lot more powerful than you realize in terms of how it connects with your body. And that's probably what you experience too with your stomach, because I get a very sick stomach whenever I get nervous.
Yeah.
And I get nervous a lot. So the same thing can happen with other parts. And that the process of trying to figure out what was happening to me required that I start logging on a daily basis where I was hurting and when I was hurting and how bad it was. And so I started noting, like on an actual spreadsheet, how I was feeling each day and how each part was going so that I could watch my recovery. And that made me a lot more mindful of when I would experience certain things and how I was experiencing them. And then starting to learn how to accept that.
Yes.
Because at first I was very angry.
Yes.
I was very angry that suddenly my perfectly healthy arms couldn't lift anymore. That lifting a jug of milk was hard. And I had been very strong. I was mad. And I had to learn to work through the pain, and that being angry about it wasn't going to make it go away. And that's where I had to start really doubling down on learning acceptance. Because unless I learned to accept and to grow and to move forward, I had no way out. It would just get worse. So I kind of had another motivator there to start not just noticing what was happening in my body, but also in my brain and how it talked to each other. That, you talk about, if you think about flare-ups, a lot of times flare-ups have to do with our thoughts. And we might not even associate those things. But when we take a step back and we really look at what is going on in my mind right now, what is on my mind, what's been happening, that check-in helps us in many other ways. So that's where I've found it to be really valuable, of just noting and also doing that check-in and seeing it now as like, this is a requirement. It's not just something you should do. It's like, for me, it's like I have to. I have to be really mindful all the time of what's going on.
Yeah, that's super powerful. I think we make this unnatural separation between the brain and the body, and they they are one thing. They are constantly speaking to each other. And for me, it was definitely when I did what you did, start checking in, start linking these two things, that my healing started. And you've talked a lot about noticing, and I'd love to talk more about that. You have this beautiful website called Life Noticed, and I feel
Thank you.
like as a group of nature journalists, our job our job is to notice things. And I'd love to talk to you about that. What this word noticing means to you and why that's so important in your life.
You can't really begin to understand something until you notice it,
Mm.
until you begin to take time and you dedicate that time and you give that attention to that thing. And I think that's part of noticing is the attention.
Mm-hmm.
When you're noticing something, if you just see something, maybe it's caught your attention a little bit. But when you begin noticing something, it's kind of like your brain is telling you we want to pay attention to this. So I look at the word noticing as being like selected attention allocation. It's
Yeah.
like we're seeing something and we're seeing it on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see it. And it's also things that become noteworthy. So when you're noticing something, and you're giving it that attention and it becomes noteworthy, you begin to care about it more. You begin
Mm-hmm.
to stay with it longer. And that's painted a lot of kind of themes in my life of seeing, noticing the world around me, but also noticing the world in my mind and trying to figure out how do all these things, not what the interplay is, but what is it about these things that if I remove myself from, you know, being a part of it and look at it more as like an observer, what can I learn from this? What's that other story that lies within these things that I can really see? And I think we get so much of a snapshot in things, especially now. We scroll past things through so
Mm.
quickly.
Mm.
We just see like one little quick blip on the radar and we don't know the whole story. And so I think noticing is a big step towards uncovering the story behind something.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, this whole theme of stories that's coming out in our conversation, I often think about all the millions, billions of stories that are playing out in nature around us that we don't see unless we notice them. Sometimes I'll be standing outside and a spider will swing across on a web and like anchor itself to a tree, and you just see this whole story starting to happen. And it's
Mhm.
happening whether you're noticing it or not. But when we start to notice, wow, it's it's quite astonishing that all these creatures are having their story play out right now. And we
Mhm.
get the joy. We get the joy of being able to stop and notice it if we take the time.
That's right. And it's nice too because I think we have so much chatter in our minds.
Yeah.
Maybe other folks don't have as much, but I have a ton of chatter and it's a nice break to get outside of that chatter and to pay attention to, like, for example, so we have black phoebes and sage phoebes in my neighborhood. And when the barn swallows are kind of at their peak season, the phoebes don't make as much noise that time of year. I don't know if it's because of heat or I don't know why yet, but now I'm wondering, you don't hear the phoebes as much. They're around. You hear the swallows. But when the swallows have left and the weather cools, the phoebes start to make more noise, it seems. And last night we heard a new call by a sage phoebe. And it was this kind of almost like an alarm call. And Jason and I were wondering, what is that? What does that mean? We've heard,
Yeah.
its other normal call or its main call often. And that's, and that makes me question, okay, well, what is the main call and how do I even know what the main call
Mm.
is? And how do I know what this other call is? And did I not hear it because of all of these other events? And it has maybe the whole time been calling. And I was just too distracted by a ton of other bird song to pick it up. So there is something about just, this has all been playing out. And my attention to it doesn't mean that it's just now happening.
Yes.
So, what is the story? What was going on with that little bird, to cause such alarm? And what had it been going through throughout the day?
Yeah, beautiful. Such great thoughts. So this website Life Noticed is a place where you share your thoughts on living an intentional life, mindfulness, mindset shifts, art, and journaling. And I'm wondering if you have a way to express what living an intentional life means to you.
I think living an intentional life begins with understanding what matters most to you in this life in terms of the people around you and what kind of impact you want to have on the world. And is what you're doing supporting that end? What is this is a hard one for me because intention for me, as I was mentioning earlier, has shifted so
Yeah.
much. And so many things have happened within the span of about 3 years. Before I met Jason, I realized I needed to slow down,
Mm.
that the life I was leading was not sustainable, and that there should be more to life than what I was seeking in my profession, no matter how much I loved it. And so life felt rich when I was at work, but life felt quite hollow every other. And I knew something was missing, and I knew that connection, that I needed that connection. And when I found Jason, that reinforced that need for rethinking how I approached what a day looks like and what life should look like. And that this was another human being that is so incredibly valuable to me that I don't ever want to fail to convey how important that connection is. And that me being able to pay attention and me being able to slow down and me being able to be comfortable with just being in a moment, that was a great gift that I could give back to this person who is so good at doing that to me. So this combination of taking that step back and developing a nature journaling practice that's rooted in noticing and mindfulness, it links together because it's kind of just one tool in the toolkit of showing up for the people that matter most, you know. And this also includes my family. They don't live as close anymore. Um, but just the people and being available for the people. And that matter most to me. And just in general too. I gave careful attention to the people I worked with, but I don't think I was so good at allowing myself opportunities to engage with others outside of work. And I wasn't really a part of a community outside of work associations. And I've found that in order to be, I think, to feel almost complete, I need that association. I need to have that type of community. I'm an introvert, so for me, it was like, pretty scary to throw myself into a community. And I think I had given up for a while on trying to find what that community is, because I think if you haven't quite found it, you don't maybe know that there is one to find.
Yes.
And so I go back to, all right, well, how do I become a good community member? How do you become a good family member? How do you become a good partner? How do you become a good spouse? You know, it's by making sure that the interactions that you have with those people, that you show up fully, that you're present. And mindfulness is how I check in with myself to make sure I'm being the best version of myself. And that when I'm not, I can note that and I can check in with that and I can apologize and tweak and work on it in the future. Because the other thing is, if you're going to participate in a community, you know, you need to give back and you need to be there for other people. And it requires an ongoing attention to, how you're approaching something. So attention to the community, but attention to how you are participating within the community and what you're doing to help give back to that community that is helping you also feel enriched. So that symbiosis. Yeah.
I love your thoughts, and I love that you have so much self awareness to know, hey, if I want to be a good partner, if I want to be a good friend, community member, family member, I need to bring myself back to stillness. I need to bring myself back to this moment so that I'm not thinking about work, so that I'm not thinking about everything else, but be here and notice and be with and be present. It's really, really powerful thoughts and a really wonderful way to live. I love what you said, and I agree 100%. I think that's you've hit what it's all about. So I love the way you think about your art practice and your creative practice as well, because on your blog Life Notice, you do a lot of self-reflection, and you offer very good tips for how we can get through blocks. So for example, inspiration. A lot of us do wait for inspiration, and you talk about how you could be waiting forever. You just have to schedule it. You have to sit down, move your pen around on the page, and you talk about time blocking. You talk about scheduling time for inspiration. I'd love for you to talk about your sort of routines and the way that you keep that going. You keep your practice fresh and moving in
Sure.
your daily routine.
So every day, actually, it's usually at night, and at night is when I'm most tired. And that's probably when I'm going to do my worst work because I've already used all my creative juices throughout the day. But I sit down, I have this routine, I have my journal, and I also have just like a sketch pad. And every night, I mean, there are some exceptions, but let's just say most nights, I sit down with the intention to draw. And sometimes I like to have a really clear goal of what I'm going to draw, but there's a lot of nights where I don't have the energy to really try to draw something specific, but I don't want to lose out on that practice and on that flow. So the rule with myself is just even if you can only draw lines or circles or shapes or shade something, even if you're just drawing the sides of rocks. I like to hatch a lot when I'm really tired. You can tell when I'm probably the most tired because it'll just be a lot that I'm still getting the benefit of that exercise, but I'm also building the habit. I'm building the habit that every day, even though I'm tired, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this thing because it's important to me. And I've decided that this is important to me. And, we have other things in our lives that we feel are important to us and we show up for those things. If you have a job, even if you're tired, you probably show up for your job, right? If you have other commitments in your life and maybe you don't really feel like doing them, you still do those things typically. What we fail to do is we fail to treat our own ambitions with that same level of devotion as we do for others and for these other things in our lives. So my feeling is if you have decided at some point that this thing is important to you and you know why, you've identified that, then it's worth your attention. And even if you can't do it perfectly, that's great actually. Because, perfect is the enemy of good. It is. if the only way you'll do this thing is to feel like you have to do it at some very high level, you'll never get the practice to ever get even close. And if you forget about why you're doing it and you forget about the beauty of the process itself, you don't have an opportunity to get the benefits of it. So that's where, I talk about scheduling inspiration. I do that with writing, I do that with design. I treat it in that way, in a good way though, like a job, in terms of I take it seriously. Um, that 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 action is important for me, and I need it so that I can show up for others. It's kind of like when you're on a plane and they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first,
Hmm.
because you're going to be totally useless in a few seconds for helping anybody else out. If you need to help others and you're showing up that way all the time, you need to do something too that's going to help you out. So, art for me too is, I have my professional side of art, which is
Hmm.
digital, and then I have my drawing and illustrated journaling and nature journaling, and I'm a total rookie. You see my stuff and it's, you can tell. And it's I mean, I would love to in one way I would love to be able to make pretty pictures because that would mean that I'd practiced a lot. But other than that, it's like, no, this is just this thing that is beautiful to me, and this process needs to happen. And so I'm gonna schedule that into my life because it's worthy of my time.
You wrote about how you work digitally, and when you're working digitally, you have infinite chances to correct and recorrect.
Undo,
Whereas,
undo.
exactly, undo everything, redo it. And in that way, it becomes the product that you're focused on. Whereas with nature journaling, it's the flow, it's the process that that's important. That's a really big flip, isn't it?
It's a huge flip because I've had to look at art for so many years as being something that you don't let anybody see it until it's as perfect as you can get it within the amount of time. And then you turn it over and you release it into the world. And it's as good as it's going to get in that moment. And to then take things that are really sometimes rushed and not completely fleshed out, or, in my very private pages that I don't share, sometimes like I'm not good at sketching faces. And so I sketch faces sometimes of the people that matter to me. Or I sketched a pica, and I wrote about how I was afraid to sketch a pica because picas are like my favorite animal. And there's something where it's like this sacred thing now where heaven
Mm.
forbid I mess up this pica. Like the pica is gonna mind, you know? It's not like I imagine it, I guess, as like, "That doesn't look anything like me. How dare you?" Like I'm insulting an entire species. And it's the thing is I realized is when I don't draw that thing because I think it has t like I don't wanna somehow come off like I think that this is a great representation. So, I don't want anybody to think I'm like, trying to pass this off as good work, right? Like, first of all, nobody cares. Nobody
Yes.
cares.
Yes.
And number two is I know that if I draw it, I'm noticing it differently and I get to kind of interact with that thing.
Yes.
Not with a live pica. We don't have anywhere where I live. But I'm paying tribute to it. I'm kind of
Absolutely.
honoring it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
spending time drawing you because I think you're amazing.
Yes.
I if I hold out and never do it because it's gotta be a certain way, I don't ever get to have that kinda loving exchange moment with that critter. So
Yes.
by holding it in such high regard, I don't get to honor it by giving it any time. So I give it no time because 'cause I'm too scared to give it any time because I can't do it exactly the way I see it in my head, and then you never get started and you never get to have that quality with that thing or with that person. It's the same thing like I mentioned drawing faces. I know I if anybody were to see the likeness that I have come up for them, you know, I would be so sad because 'cause I'm like, "No, I love you, trust me, I know this is not representational, but I adore you."
Yeah.
Um, but it's like, no, I got to notice that your lips, they curl just a little bit right here, and your ear looks kinda like this, and I just noticed that your hair does this thing, you know, and it kinda makes you love that person, in a different way, a deeper way too. So it's like, I don't want to give up on that. I don't want to not do that just because I can't do it perfectly. Because then I'll never get to do it at all.
That makes me so happy. And I used to do that thing of having to, if I shared or showed something, that I would feel like it's necessary to point out explicitly all the ways that I know that it's not perfect. And and yet you're 100% right. When we take the time to draw somebody or something, we are honoring them and we are exchanging with them. And it's beautiful what you said about, yeah, I just noticed your lips because I took time to do that. And who cares what it comes out like? I know you a little bit better because I did that sketch, and that's so
That's right.
important.
I like that. The way you said it, I know you a little bit better. That's exactly right.
So you started a YouTube channel. You're a self-identified introvert, and you are putting your story out there in this way. You're firstly, you're an amazing filmmaker. You're very skilled in what you do with the
Thank
camera,
you.
with a video camera also. But now you're on the other side. You're putting yourself in front of the camera. Tell me about that. Tell me about starting your YouTube channel and how that felt and how you overcome this initial funniness of being on the other side.
It is the most intimidating thing I've ever done in my life. Sincerely. Um, I'm used to being on the other side of the camera, on the back of the
Yeah.
camera, and pointing it at others. I've done interviews. I've, with photography, I was on the other end of the camera. I'm used to helping others tell their story, and I've loved that, but I'm not used to telling my story. And so to sit on this side of the camera and look into that big eye, that cyclone, the Canon lens, and flick that on and start talking to it. Um, there was something about it, and there's something, and I haven't done enough videos yet to have it feel natural. And my
Mhm.
goal is I would like to do enough that it starts to feel natural. I don't know when that will be,
Mhm.
but it's been interesting to figure out what I want to say and work through my own mind of overcoming my own, I would say, personal insecurity of, how you mentioned that when you were drawing and you would point out
Mhm.
when something wasn't right because
Mhm.
you wanted people to know, no, I see it too, kind of thing. I guess I feel like I don't want anybody to assume that I think what I have to say is particularly better than what anybody else has to say. I have my things to say. I have my story to tell, but I don't know if it's, I don't look at it as like, well, you should pick mine over this
Mhm.
other person's. And I'm not a brand, you know, where I'm telling this very clear-cut story or giving kind of a peep behind the lens for someone else. Mine is, well, what am I saying by saying anything about myself? So there's that fear to overcome as to, is this going to be something that somebody wants to hear? And then trying to be comfortable that it's probably not going to be for most people. And that's the case with anything that any of us do.
Mhm.
And that really my goal is, if I can reach just one person that might have their life improved by getting a shortcut on some life lessons that I've had to learn the hard way. If I can provide some kind of quote unquote mentorship that way,
Mhm.
and then it's worth it. And then it's worth the anguish of putting myself on camera. It's worth that fear and overcoming that fear because I know that I was helped by other people in my life. I've been inspired by others. I've been helped by others. I am here because of others. And if something that I share, like I said, helps anybody else, then it's like, yeah, I want to use my skills of telling a story to do that. But it's part of a bigger process of just
Mm.
getting myself out there in a way where, like the introvert gets on stage and the spotlight shines in their face and they kind of have like that, I think, self-doubting moment of, yeah, should I say anything? Like, oh, this is stupid. Nobody's gonna like this. So
I love it. I love that you're stretching yourself in that way, and I totally identify with that as well. I'm an introvert, and those first steps are so challenging. But I
yeah.
also love you've written about how we can and we shouldn't box ourselves. You wrote about personality tests and how that can affect the way we live and the way we step out or don't step out of that box. And I think that's a powerful thing, and I love that you're stretching yourself in this way, and I love watching you. I can't wait to see what else comes out of this process for you.
Well, thank you. And you're I'm I'm amazed by what you have accomplished with this podcast, especially as you started off with similar fears and worry about putting yourself out there, and you did it. And you're at, like, what is this, 102, 103?
103, yeah.
Wow. So look look who's talking. So you definitely are, you serve as a role model, as a really
Thank
good
you.
example. So
Thank you
well
so
done.
much. So you talked a bit about finding community, and so you the door opened for you into nature journaling through John Muir Laws, and now you have been really involved in the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference, John Muir Laws' conference, and the Wild Wonder Foundation. Tell me about that, about finding this community and then going forward, helping the community go forward in the way that you can.
I think I had been into nature journaling for about a year
Mm-hmm.
and felt like, you know what? This is really a neat thing, and this is a neat community. And so I had sent out an email and just kind of thrown myself, like, here's what I do. And if
Mm.
you're ever interested, and, then let me know and I would love to help. And, it wound up turning into, hey, we have a little time, like a bit later on in time, we have a foundation um, that we're starting, and the foundation had not been announced at that time, and it's
Mm-hmm.
super exciting. But we had the
Yes.
conference too, and it was, would you want to help with this conference as well? I'm like, absolutely. So uh, it's been a really wonderful experience to work with the team of volunteers, and folks who are organizing and just facilitating and making sure that the conference is the success that it is. And so my goal is to still continue to, help within this community as much as possible, because it really does. It does make me feel better. Everything I benefit from this community, it's like I have to give back. I want to give back. So it's been really just a great experience, having this opportunity to be a part of this. Yeah,
Mm-mm. It's an amazing community, isn't it?
it is. Oh my gosh,
There's so
yes.
much joy and love and stewardship and connection, and it's a big deal.
It's just everybody is I mean, I don't wanna say everybody, but my goodness, it seems like it. Everybody's
Mm.
so nice
Mm.
and wonderful and helpful, and it's just a really it's a just a sweet group of people, and they have my whole heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
my whole heart. Jason has my whole heart, but, the pit the chambers that are not reserved for, uh, yeah, Jason.
That is so sweet. So you've been working on the Wild Wonder Challenge, which is a 30-day challenge set out by Marley Piper. And I wonder, it's 30 days of prompts. I have been loving watching what's coming out of you, and I wonder how that's stretching your thinking.
Well, I'm behind on it, full disclosure, so we've passed the 30-day
I
window,
don't
which
think
was
that matters at all. I think it's wonderful that you're sticking to
I'm only on day like, tonight will be day 24 for me, but we're on October 3rd, so,
it.
it's some nights I feel like, "Oh, I can't do this tonight," and
Mm.
the challenge was running parallel to when the
Yes.
conference was happening, and I
Yes.
was helping with
That's a
moderation,
busy month.
and the conference went till at night, until, like, 8:20 or so at
Yeah,
night,
yeah.
and so that was like, "Okay, end of the day, I still need to catch up with my sweetheart and get clean," and, so it was really hard some nights to sit down and do the challenge, and that was the whole point of the challenge, though, is it's a challenge, Marley said. So, it's really some nights I worry that I'm not, I used to be a big perfectionist, and I've been
Mhm.
working on this so much because I think perfectionism is just crushing, and I don't want to embrace it.
Yes.
But there's this part of me every day that sees the challenge and it sees the prompt and it wonders, "Oh, wait, what am I supposed to how am I supposed to do it the right way? What's the
Mm.
right way?" He says interspecies relationships. What exactly does he mean? So I can do it, you know, like there's a rule book. And
Yes.
one of the most important things I'm learning through this 30-day challenge is there's no rule book. Just like the
Yes.
rest of it, there's no rule book. You're not breaking a rule. The world's not going to collapse. Everything's what and it's kind of like, what do you think it means? You know?
Yes.
And if there is a way that it should be, you know, at least in my world, it's stretching my mind to be okay that it's just there. And it's my interpretation of it. Trying to get within the prompt, right? Trying to honor like what does he mean? What do I think he means? But I don't have to have angst over it, like that I'm
Yes.
gonna get it wrong. And I
Yes.
think that's what's helping me is try to follow a guide. What do you think it means? All right, that's okay. You don't need to go research it further. You know,
I
no
think
puff
one of the
eliminated in the process.
Yeah,
So
yeah, the weakest link.
right. So I've had a lot of fun with it. Like, there was Dawn, Day, and Night, which is the most recent one I did, and that one was one of those sketches I did late at night where I was just
Mm.
tired and I didn't do
Mhm.
it the same quality, but I put the same heart into it,
Yes.
for what I had. And there's just also been, like, finding critters around your home, and nature journaling about them, and I'm finding too that one of the things that I didn't really show in my nature journaling in the past, and I would keep it in my private pages, but I wouldn't show this in pages typically that I would share on the internet, for example, like on Instagram.
Mhm.
I'm finding that I'm I like to share about what I'm thinking of the thing besides just the observation of the thing.
Yes.
And when I would publish a nature journal page, I would only share the thing that I thought somebody else as an observer would want to know. And now I'm putting myself a lot more into my pages, just like I would do in my private journal. And I'm putting my little jokes in there, and you can see a bit more. I would say, massively developed silly side, and let the silly side come in, and it's making me
Yes.
feel like, yeah, they're starting to feel like me more. They're starting to feel like me that I wasn't maybe comfortable. sharing, and I'm starting to feel more comfortable sharing that silly side, my humor, and just not taking it so seriously, but in a good way, you know.
Yes.
So yeah, it's pushing me to just also make things and be okay with letting them loose in a short time span when it comes to this. And just like, you know what, it's time to go to bed. That means the challenge day is over.
Yes.
So what have you got? And don't be so precious about your work. You know, be precious about the process. Don't be precious about the product. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that your silly side is coming out. That part of you that you reserve for private can
Hmm.
be can enrich other people's life when they see your pages, and I love that that's trickling out now.
Thank you.
Brooke, it's been amazing. I have loved our conversation. Thank you for spending these moments with me.
Thank you so much. It's really good seeing you and talking with you, and I hope you have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Brooke. I adore her gentle and articulate way of exploring what it means to live an intentional life. She has such a natural way of thoughtfully reflecting on the things that can cause us blocks and how we can move past them. I also appreciated her focus on noticing. It's a powerful practice, noticing. We can walk through life with our thoughts on the past or the future, or we can notice what's happening right now, right where we are in this moment. When we get into the habit of being open and ready to notice, we see things that we would otherwise miss around us in nature and also within us, with our emotions, thoughts, and feelings. And from there, from the point of noticing, as Brooke said, that's where you can start to understand something about the natural world, something about another person, or something about ourselves. And that leads to connection, which is essential. So please do look at the show notes where you'll find links to where you can connect with Brooke online. Subscribe to her YouTube channel and follow along with her blog if you'd like to learn more about creative habits and living with intention. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.